So if you look at three major trials, which I already discussed with you, Themis was with DABT and ticagrelor, and Pegasus was again with ticagrelor, low dose and aspirin, while Compass was on rivaroxaban 2.5 mg, very low dose vascular dose with a low dose aspirin. So when you look at any other option for these patients, if you look at clopidogrel-based studies like clopidogrel aspirin or clopidogrel aspirin in patients with stroke MI or ticagrelor studies, what you see is in clopidogrel trials, you cause more bleeding with a lesser benefits, while in Pegasus, there is definitely a significant benefit which you achieve by adding a ticagrelor, but the offset is you increase the bleeding also. While in Compass, definitely you deliver close to 24% reduction with bleeding risk, which is lesser than Pegasus, which comes from ticagrelor. So if you look at all these 5 trials, the 2 trials which have delivered good reduction in the relative risk. One is Pegasus, 16%. Other is a Compass, which is 24%. So Compass study with rivaroxaban aspirin combination not only delivered better results, but the bleeding risk also was lesser compared to ticagrelor based regimen. So whenever a patient who has a higher the risk, they tend to do with dual platelet inhibition. So we know very well, I have started with this on my talk. We started having a lot of newer anticoagulants. These newer anticoagulants came as an alternative to warfarin in patients who have a stroke secondary to atrial fibrillation. And we have trials like Relay, Aristotle, and Rocket AF, which push these studies, drugs into a big usage. And we are using these drugs for a reasonable period of time. And we know rivaroxaban is the single most extensively evaluated NOAC in thromboembolism prevention and treatment. It is indicated for venous thromboembolism prevention in surgical patients, venous thromboembolism in medical patients, and treatment of venous thromboembolism, atrial fibrillation, for stroke prevention. It has pediatric indications. We have started using in acute coronary syndrome. We have started using chronic coronary artery disease and chronic peripheral vascular disease. When you compare with vitamin K antagonist, rivaroxaban always delivered lesser bleeding with a better benefit, and unique benefits of rivaroxaban particularly happens at a arterial vascular disease level. So while other 2 study drugs, dabigatran and apixaban, could not deliver a bigger vascular benefits, rivaroxaban was delivering excellent vascular benefit. So this is a drug which is ideally suited for patients who need a dual pathway inhibition. So where are the contraindication or unresolved issues in patients with indications for rivaroxaban? At the same time, you may not be able to use them. One is a mechanical heart valves, antiphospholipid syndrome, patients who have end-stage renal or liver disease, and in some patients who have essential drugs which may interfere with effect of rivaroxaban. Unresolved issue remains patients with chronic disease, kidney disease and liver disease, and patients with obesity, and particularly LV thrombus and thrombosis in unusual sites. These are the areas where, although there is not much of a data available for newer anticoagulants, but we are still using it. LV thrombus, I tend to use a lot of newer anticoagulants with significantly good benefits. If you want to summarize on this, rivaroxaban is the most widely studied and most widely approved newer anticoagulant. Safety benefits of NOACs, including rivaroxaban, appear to be amplified in Asian populations. Challenge for clinician is to treat higher proportion of these eligible patients. I'll touch upon for another 5-10 minutes about anticoagulation in COVID-19, because that's one thing we are seeing a lot of these patients presenting with thromboembolic complications. And we know very well from our earlier experience, septic inflammation and DAC are common, both in SARS and MERS. And coagulopathy is common in sick COVID-19 patients. Close to 15% of non-survivors and 7% of survivors. DAC had an incidence of 71% in non-survivors and 0.4% of survivors. We have seen a lot of patients presenting with thromboembolic complications. COVID-19 patients tend to present with hemorrhagic phenotype also. Autopsy have revealed patients who had a pulmonary hemorrhage. Patients tend to present with thrombocytopenia and low fibrinogen levels. They tend to present a group of patients who tend to have a poor outcomes. This could be a late stage of DIC. We know that burned out stage, you tend to see a lot of bleeding than thrombosis. And we don't know exactly how easily these patients bleed. So if you look at thrombophilic phenotype, we have limited hydropsy data with a varying thrombosis and microthrombi. They tend to have dialysis and ECMO related clotting also. Case reports of extensive thrombosis still exist in literature. We have case series of pulmonary embolism and DVT, and you know very well in our clinical practice, we tend to see, particularly in the second wave, we have seen a lot of patients in a post-COVID state, the patients who are treated for COVID presenting with pulmonary thromboembolism. So I'm not going into treatment of COVID. So there are a lot of data and trials there in COVID. We know very well this. We are in a very early phase of understanding this disease. Whatever the data right now we have, a lot of times becomes conflicting. There are only few things which we right now know about COVID. One is we know it's an immune-mediated injury, and we want to prevent it by adding an immunosuppressants. And another most important thing we require is an anticoagulation, because other than steroids, one other thing which has exactly shown clear benefit is a prevention of thromboembolism. We know very well, we regularly check for thromboembolic manifestations now, and patients tend to have high risk of thromboembolism not only during the period of COVID, they tend to have higher thromboembolic risk during the follow-up also. There are a lot of studies. Now, I think you have studies every day coming up in multiple journals with everyone pointing towards higher incidence of thromboembolic in these patients. The problem in these patients is, as I already discussed, these patients not only have a higher thrombotic risk, they tend to have higher bleeding risk also secondary to thrombophilic tendencies. The bleeding risk is around 2 to 5%. It could be an intracranial, pulmonary, or procedure-related bleeds, retroperitoneal bleeds, or secondary to falls and Foley's injury, and heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, because we know that heparin remains a mainstay of treating in the early part of the disease. So heparin-induced thrombocytopenia is around 1% with unfractionated heparin and close to 0.5% with low molecular heparin. We use unfractionated heparin and low molecular heparin, and most commonly low molecular heparin. Now we know very well recommended dose is around 40 mg of enoxaparin every 24 hours. That's what we use. And we know most of these patients ultimately may end up in a ARDS kind of a situation. We tend to use other agents like direct thrombin inhibitors like bivalirudin, although my knowledge with these drugs in these patients are limited. But a lot of us have started using direct oral anticoagulants in these patients. We use direct NA inhibitors because you don't have to monitor them for a lot. And you can use them both for prevention and treatment. And we tend to prefer them over coumadins. The reason being less monitoring is required. And these patients monitoring can become a little problematic because of the multiple thromboembolic and coagulation related changes which happen over a period of time in a dynamic fashion. So you may have to monitor coagulation with an activated clot time. We know that's the reason we don't use long-term heparins or warfarins in this patient, because you need a lot of monitoring, and monitoring may be little cumbersome and problematic in this group of patients. So what the guidelines say, the interim guidelines by ISTH says there is a need for a thromboembolic drugs in these patients. Thromboembolism and anticoagulant therapy during COVID-19 pandemic, you have interim clinical guidelines from Anticoagulation Forum. American College of Cardiology suggests to have anticoagulation in these patients. So most of the recommendations now say they include anticoagulation as a part of managing these patients. Just I'll walk you through for another 5 minutes. The patients hospitalized with COVID-19, most of them require pharmacological venous thromboembolism prophylaxis unless contraindicated. We have to carefully assess them for an incident thromboembolic events. You have to closely follow PT-INR, APTT, D-dimer, and fibrinogen. You have to continue whatever the antithrombotic therapy patient was continuing earlier if there is no contraindication now presented. All patients admitted with COVID-19 symptoms, if there is high risk for thromboembolism, who has been admitted in intensive care unit, you have to start with heparin, either an unfractionated heparin or low molecular heparin. And if if you see that you can perform point of care ultrasound, and if positive for thromboembolism, you can continue therapeutic antication. Or if it is negative, you can de-escalate to a prophylactic dose. If there is low risk of thromboembolism, if D-dimer is more than 3, you can continue enoxaparin twice a day as a therapeutic dose. Or D-dimers are less, you can consider as a prophylactic dose. If the D-dimer levels are in middle level, you can consider adding a therapeutic dose of enoxaparin. A routine, what about post discharge care? A routine venous thromboembolism post discharge is not recommended by NIH. FDA approved prophylactic anticoagulation regimens can be considered if high risk for venous thromboembolism and low risk for bleeding, using the criteria whatever used in the clinical trials. Anticoagulation forum says there is no evidence of anticoagulation beyond hospitalization, but reasonable to consider if low risk for bleeding and high risk for venous thromboembolism, including intubated, sedated, and paralyzed for multiple days. While American Society of Hematology considers it is reasonable to consider FDA-approved post-discharge prophylactic anticoagulation regimens, either rivaroxaban or in a lot of patients now use apixaban also. CHEST considers patient can be considered to have a low risk of bleeding if there is need for an anticoagulation. If the patient has a low risk of bleeding, you can consider post-discharge anticoagulation also. If you look at from the professional associations, International Society of Thrombosis and Hemostasis advises all hospitalized patients should have a prophylactic dose. Therapeutic dose are not required to be considered in all the patients. American College of Chest Physicians says the same. Global COVID-19 collaborative group also defines the same. While American Society of Hematology also considers prophylactic dose in all the hospitalized patients. So if you look at rivaroxaban as a molecule to consider it in this, it is a single most extensively evaluated newer anticoagulant. Venous thromboembolism prevention in surgical patient, venous thromboembolism prevention in medical patients, which we already seen that. So what we stand in COVID? In COVID anticoagulation, inflammatory surge is invariably associated with hypercoagulable state. Inflammation activates tissue factor and complement pathways. Anticoagulation initiation, drugs, and goal should be patient-specific, considering the bleeding risk and risk for thromboembolism. Anti-10A-based monitoring or more accurately reflects heparin effect in COVID. You have to be a little cautious about dysfunctional platelets in patients with liver disease. PTT-guided anticoagulation is problematic in COVID patients because you have an increased elevated D-dimer, DIC situation, and patients who tend to have an elevated CRPs, decreased with high levels of factor VIII and high fibrinogens. Hematological societies remain skeptical about empiric anticoagulation, although most of us tend to use in a lot of our patients who are under treatment for COVID. The patients who have a high risk COVID, we tend to have at least a short-term anticoagulation because we know in most of these patients, the most problematic area of COVID management still remains thromboembolism, and prevention of thromboembolism remains the primary target or primary issue in managing these patients. With this, I'll close my discussion for Q&A sessions. Thank you.